All right, it's time for Inside the NHL with Chris Johnston of NorthStar Bets. Chris, we're on the other side of the trade deadline. How's the come down been from a crazy couple of weeks for you in the NHL?
Yeah, I call this the happy side of the trade deadline, the period where everything tends to kind of calm down around the league. That was really an unprecedented period, actually, the last few weeks for the NHL with the amount of first-round picks traded, some of the big names that went various ways. And I think just the number of teams that kind of went close to all in terms of giving up a lot of draft capital or futures to try to. So this is the fun part because we can really focus in on the playoff races and then ultimately the start of the Stanley Cup playoffs. And, I'm happy to have.
What was it like working Trade Center for TSN?
It was a lot of fun, actually. I mean, as much as everyone likes to have a good laugh at, the 9 live hours of coverage and all that stuff. I mean, I would argue there's nothing else like it in the sport. You got, skits with Bruce Boudreau, some fun with James Duthie doing a music video about, trying to tank for Connor Bedard. We did a mock draft lottery. And then, in addition, bringing you up to date on the news and analysis from our experts. I think it's a day to have fun. And I think that we found the sweet spot in doing it because we take it seriously in that, of course, we're trying to break trades. We're trying to bring you the latest information, but I think we're also, having a laugh at ourselves too, because it is sort of patently ridiculous to do 9 straight hours of trade coverage when you've had as many big trades as we had the 3 weeks leading into it. So, I had a good time that day. I don't think it's going anywhere, and I also think this year might've been a one-off, the fact that there was so many big moves ahead of that final day itself. I'm going to have to see that many years in a row to say that that's the new normal. I think it was just an outlier year where we had so much of the big action already taken care of.
Yeah, I do appreciate the self-deprecation on the TSN broadcast. The Bruce Boudreau segment was absolutely brilliant, by the way. It was hilarious. But you say you think it's an outlier. Why is that? I mean, listen, it made for great theater. It made for great entertainment. The NHL needs these types of domains. Why do you think this was a one-off and perhaps next year it's going to revert back to normal?
Well, we had really specific circumstances this year. For one, we had a number of teams that declared themselves absolute sellers. We saw that whether, going way back a few weeks ago, the Leafs made the Ryan O'Reilly trade a couple weeks out from the deadline. We saw the Tarasenko deal to the Rangers, quite early. As things went along, Patrick Kane, Timo Meier, all these guys end up on contenders, a bit of a domino effect there. And also maybe because of the fact that there's a bunch of teams at the bottom of the league, quite frankly, who are not trying to be good. And we had very defined sellers. It almost feels like everything lined up perfect, that you had teams that were absolutely committed to buying and aggressively. And then you had, a number of teams at the bottom end of the standings absolutely committed to selling and willing to do it. Seeing a team like St. Louis sell as many players as they did. This was supposed to be a year they were trying to make the playoffs. Obviously, things didn't go well there, and they ended up trading a lot of their veterans away. Washington sold players. We're not used to seeing that. Detroit sold players despite being in the playoff race. And so I think teams sort of declared where they were a little bit more definitively than we've seen in the past. And, I think eventually we're going to go back, that the cap's going to go up in a meaningful way that it hasn't in recent years. And I think we'll just see a more traditional deadline that goes down to the wire as time goes along. But hey, maybe I'm wrong. That's just my feeling now. I don't think 1 year, though, is going to necessarily tell us this is a new trend.
So just coming down, Ryan O'Reilly, broken fingers being put on the LTIR, according to Sheldon Keefe. They were talking after practice today. What does that mean for O'Reilly's timeline being on the LTIR?
Well, it means he has to be out at minimum 24 days. So, you're looking 3+ weeks from where we sit now, with about 5.5 weeks left in the regular season. I think that's going to be what we're measuring it upon is can Ryan O'Reilly get back during the regular season? If so, how many games can he play? This is pretty much a worst case scenario for a new player on a team, and especially given that we're talking about someone who was brought in as a rental, at the expense of a first round pick plus some other assets. Those guys more than anything. I mean, Ryan O'Reilly doesn't need games up to date in this league. He's been around for a long time, of course, but I think getting him comfortable in the lineup, figuring out his exact place, that was still very much a work in progress for Sheldon Keefe. We'd seen him moved around a little bit as would be expected to find out where he best fits with the Leafs. And the fact that, he's now unavailable for at least most of the rest of the regular season at minimum. It's hard to put a positive spin on that. I suppose the positive is there is plenty of time for him to get back and be ready to play those playoff games. But, for those that were seeing this move as a little bit like Nick Foligno of a couple years ago, this is an unfortunate, further parallel, because part of what doomed Foligno's time with Toronto 2 seasons back was that he had a back injury and just was never healthy enough to make a difference. You hope that's not the case for Ryan O'Reilly.
Yeah, I thought the exact same thing, but a broken finger, listen, obviously not ideal, but you can still stay in shape with a broken finger, away from the rink, not playing games, obviously, and you would hope that by playoff time, he's just fine. But, it's Toronto here, CJ. Obviously, the deadline's passed, so we can now speculate about the future of GMs and that type of thing. Kyle Dubas, listen, I don't think he could do much more than he did before the deadline. He addressed all the needs his team needed pretty much. Is his future still contingent very much on success in the playoffs? Because at this point, he can't do any more. He's brought the players in. Most people are saying, yep, job well done. At what point does he deserve that new contract?
Well, in my the season started, I think it's kind of silly to base the future of an organization, the future of someone as important as your general manager, on what happens in a 2-week stretch of hockey in the playoffs. And look, I get it. The Leafs are at a point as an organization where something does have to change, or there will be change. I understand those calls, but the GM is making process-based decisions. The GM really shouldn't be judged, in my opinion, based on one little slice of time, because what he's doing is setting the grounds in place, from the lowest levels of the organization right up to the NHL roster every day to set it up for as many cracks of success as possible. And to me, I don't know how you could argue that Kyle Dubas hasn't done that. The Leafs have not delivered in a Game 7. That's basically what this comes down to. But they have become an absolute class organization in this league. You talk to any other front office, and I do as part of my day-to-day job, the Leafs are at the top in the terms of the way they build out their program, with the way they manage a very tight salary cap picture year after year after year. Kyle Dubas is out there making moves, able to make signings, making creative trades to have it all fit together. I get that ultimately it's a winning business. The Leafs win more than anybody pretty much in the regular season. They're a top 5 team over Kyle Dubas's tenure in terms of total wins as the general manager. I just think it would be crazy to move on from him now. But it's hard to read into anything other than its current situation, that it hinges on what happens in this playoffs. The organization wanted to see him work his final year under this contract. And I think there's danger, quite frankly, depending what happens, maybe he decides to leave. I'm not reporting that based on knowledge, but, this is the flip side of when you have a negotiation or you have someone's contract expiring, is they can choose to leave as well. And so, I think the Leafs should have signed him before the season began. They didn't. I think this would be a good time to maybe revisit those talks, because, whether or not they beat the Lightning or not in April, to me, that's not really the judge of his job. The judge of his job is how he's managing this overall large program. And I think that the Leafs have really become a top class organization under his watch.
Speaking of the team they're most likely going to face in the first round, the Tampa Bay Lightning have been in the news. John Cooper sitting his top line on Saturday, at least for a whole period, and then a bounce back against Carolina on Sunday, them losing 6-0 to Carolina. So not the best weekend for the Tampa Bay Lightning. And I was trying to compare that in my head, if that were to be happening in Toronto, if Keefe were to sit his first line, or if they were to lose that same way, what the follow would be for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And what is that for Tampa Bay?
Well, if it was almost anywhere else in the league, it would be a 5-alarm fire. I think what's different about Tampa, of course, is just the success they've had. How long John Cooper's been there, the fact that they've been to 4 Stanley Cup finals with him as their head coach. They've won 2 of them. They've been at the top of the league. I think that there's a different dynamic at place with that team, with that organization, with that coach and those players. I mean, all those players have played for him for a long time. I think there's a deeper trust there. And it's hard to, again, there's no positive spin to be put on what's happened for Tampa. They've been leaky of late. It's a pretty big message to sit your top 3 forwards. The way that John Cooper did, when you do that, of course, that's a button a coach can only push so many times. You're looking for immediate responses. They didn't get that in the game against Carolina. But I would suggest to you that the fact that Tampa is unique among all teams in the league right now, that it's probably less of a big deal there than it would be pretty much anywhere else. That being said, you're still looking for that response as we go deeper into this week. The Lightning have been a top class team, but if things aren't going well, if there isn't able to get some sort of reaction, there's going to be more pointed questions asked. But the Lightning get some benefit of the doubt here, as does John Cooper, as do those star players who've had a long track record of success. And so, the fact there's still 5+ weeks in the regular season, I still see them as a top contender by the time the playoffs begin.
Didn't the Devils fire their coach years ago, right at the end, just before the playoffs? Jacques Lemaire, I think, got fired, right? And I forget who they brought in there, and they won the cup.
Yes, I think it's happened a few times in New Jersey. Once Claude Julien got it late in the season there. But yes, that's Lou Lamoriello. He's done it. Look, I would be shocked. Look, nothing surprises me in sports, but I would be shocked if we're ever talking about John Cooper losing his job before the end of this season. That would be absolutely crazy if that happened. We're talking about one of the best paid coaches, the one that has had the most success. I know this isn't a good look. It was not a good weekend in Tampa, but that group always finds their way out of a funk, and I suspect it'll happen again.
It's probably, you would think, complacency to a certain point. That this team, like you said, 3 straight cup finals, they know what awaits them. You can understand why perhaps the foot comes off the gas a little bit at this point in the season, as long as they refine themselves between now and the playoffs.
Exactly. And it's part of what I don't like about the divisional playoff format is that we've known Tampa and Toronto were going to play again for at least a month. If I'm being charitable, it's probably a few months that it's been evident. They know the same thing too, right? And if there's a group that knows what it's like to play, months and months and months beyond the regular season, they've done it consistently. And so if they're maybe, even if it's sort of in the back of their minds, if it's not a conscious decision to conserve some energy or not give everything right now, I think that they understand that, I don't even think home ice matters to them guys either. Like, they won the 2021 Stanley Cup starting every series on the road. I think literally they're a team that has nothing to play for beyond just, formalizing their playoff spot, which again is going to happen in due course just because they built up enough of a buffer. So it's hard to create or fabricate urgency among a veteran team. I think that's part of what John Cooper's trying to do when you're sitting those players out on a sleepy Saturday game in Buffalo after you're trying to get a reaction. You're trying to spark the system, shock the system, if you will, because I think that the situation or the circumstances don't do it automatically. But look, the playoffs still have some time here, for them to get going. And I don't think we should be firing anyone or saying the Lightning are done or anything like that. I think at your peril, would you say that Tampa's in crisis?
Chris Johnston, thank you so much. Let's do this again soon.
See you next week, boys.